I mean, he's just not really very visible at all. I mean, those political junkies like us, we read what he says and we are all what's going on in Mar-a-Lago and who's going down there and what's going on. We're following the sort of inside game that's going on within the party. But generally speaking, the guy is just not very visible. I mean, he's been kicked off the social media platforms. He calls in for an interview every once in a while. He goes to places like OAN, but really it's like I saw some statistic, 90% fewer media, less media discussion than there was before he left office, which stands to reason. He's an ex-president. Who really gives a damn, right? I mean, we shouldn't care about what he's saying, but his influence has not really waned among the faithful. They are still 70% believe the election was still stolen. They're working night and day to apparently still think they can overturn the election in some cases, or at the very least, they can rig it so that the next election basically you've got to walk through hot coals to place a vote anywhere. So, they are still, the party itself is still consumed with Trump, and it's weird. Yeah. Because I think we thought that he was a media creature. It's something more than that. This is an idea. This is a cult-like devotion that is not as much a cult of personality as we thought. There's something more going on here, which I'm, a little bit, confused by. I honestly did not expect that. I mean, I honestly did not expect that it would continue with this much fervor without him being on the scene. Now, maybe it will wane. It's still early days. It's only been a few months since he left, but I am surprised, I have to say. And part of it, I mean, look what happened. You had the insurrection on the 6th, and January 6th, and a bunch of Republicans, you could tell, even somebody like Kevin McCarthy, certainly Mitch McConnell, they were all kind of going, whoa, it's all right, we're done now. Let's just move along. Trump really screwed the pooch on that one, and we're gonna start to move away from him. And they kind of did in their own weak, cowardly way. But it's backslid now. I mean, McConnell's refusing to talk about it. They're going to use Liz Cheney as a human sacrifice for the angry god Donald Trump. They've got Kevin McCarthy now is just, all in. He's actually backtracking on things he said after January 6th, refusing to do the commission, all these things that are just really, I mean, they are locking Trump in as their basically, I think, their nominee for 2024 if he wants it. And it sounds this week like he does. He said, I don't know what it is. People who like me or my followers are going to be very happy when they hear a certain announcement. So I think we know what he's going to do. When they hear a certain announcement.
Sorry, Heather. I almost there a few times, but I just was so eager to jump on this Mitt Romney example because we didn't cover it last week. But, you hear the political consensus about like the respectable Utah Republican voter. And how Utah Republicans, they want some sort of old school, like the way Chuck Hagel's describing the Republican Party of truth and of honor and of, constitutionality, which is ridiculous. But the Utah Republicans tended to, I guess, at least see themselves that way. At the Utah GOP state convention, Mitt Romney was heckled by people in Utah, his own constituents that elected that kind of guy. Like, I don't even know if Mitt Romney could get primaried down the line in Utah just because of how far this party has fallen into Trumpism.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. That's such a good point because and people all at the end of that heckling session, we all saw the video, and it was humiliating. It was horrible. I mean, they were just booing him and he sort of half-heartedly standing there going, well, I didn't care for his character or something. He wasn't really, talking about the fact that he tried to, overturn a legal election. But they were voting on a censure for him and it failed. But people didn't note what the actual vote was. It was like 788 to 711. I mean, it was, fairly close. I mean, it wasn't like, so I think you're right, Emma, that this is a serious possibility that he could get primaried. In fact, I expect it. I mean, of course. And Donald Trump is going to be behind it. He now is, he's the kingmaker who's endorsing everyone. And that's another thing that's sort of interesting is that he endorsed this woman down in Texas. They had that special election a week or so ago. I think her name was Wright. And her husband had died and she was running to replace him, which is, a common thing. And very often the wives of a deceased, representative will win the office. It happens all the time. But there was a big crowd on that ticket. There was there was a couple of Democrats. No one really expected the Democrat to win, but there were a whole bunch of Republicans on there, and it's going to go to a runoff. And as it turns out, the Trump endorsed person, he endorsed the wife, who was probably going to come in first anyway. He endorsed her, and he was, he's the big kingmaker. This is going to make all the difference. She came in at 19%. Now, she came in first because it was a big, crowd. But does that speak to you that he has that kind of clout? So he has so much clout that, they all have to kowtow to him. I mean, I just don't know. Is it, is the polling correct or is it incorrect or we're going to see some more real world examples here coming up in these special elections that come up in off years where Trump is going to be endorsing. And I don't know, I saw a thing on 538, where they went back and looked and his endorsements
not good.
Never really had that much clout.
No, not good. And, this is really sort of a fascinating, question here because, and let me also just make it clear. I almost feel like obligated to say this. I'm glad they're getting rid of, Lynn Cheney. I wish they would get rid of all of the Republicans. Way for them to kick all of the Republicans out of office and have just one left. If Donald Trump could get all of I would be happy. Lynn Cheney comes from a very, very odious. Not only is the Republican Party as it exists today a direct, natural, I think, outgrowth of what the Cheneys and her wing of the party, to the extent that it's any different from the wing that exists now, had created in this country. But she's odious. And, like I've been saying, I am excited for the Republican Party to eat her. For lunch or breakfast, but I just hope that they also choke on her bones. I mean, like that is, I want it all. And I don't think they're going to choke on her bones. I don't think
bones?
there's on Cheney's bones.
I know you keep saying Lynn. And I just had
Liz Cheney's. I don't think they're going to choke on her bones, but nevertheless, so I'm happy to see her go. What's interesting too, there was a piece today, I think it was in The Hill, about the Trump people saying, hey, it's not just Cheney that is a problem. It is also Kevin McCarthy's not a shoo-in for being Speaker of the House, right? Now, this is anticipating the Republicans winning the House, which I think has to be the odds-on favorite thing of what's happening in 2022. I mean, it just statistically speaking, and you're seeing a lot of, retirements by Democrats and, gerrymandering as to what it is, et cetera, et cetera. And so Trump is trying to solidify all of the power. I mean, McCarthy, like you said, he went out and, on the first couple of days after the 6th, they all thought like, okay, the era of Trump is over. And then something happened that you have Kevin McCarthy going down to Florida to apologize in person, essentially, to Trump. And I don't know if it was just a question of polling, but it also could be a function of, like you say, it could be a function of the right is in its own, has its own media universe now. And so what normal people experience on their average day may not be reflected in the activist base of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is very homogenous in both thought and in just demographics. So it's quite possible that what is what is appealing to, their base of 15, 20 million people, whatever it is, it just sort of like dissipates out to the other Republicans. And it could also be that they have a massive email list. There's a whole myriad of things, and the ecosystem still exists, where you get like, I make money by pushing Donald Trump stuff on Facebook. I mean, like something like that. It is fascinating, though, that but when it comes down to pushing a specific candidate, he doesn't win. We've seen this, look, it didn't work in Georgia, right? But I think the idea is that he represents the maximum Republican turnout machine. And they feel like they're going to win in years where there isn't, like, Trump not having power, but being a central organizing principle of the Republican Party is probably the best case scenario for them, because then there's no Democrats coming out to vote against Trump and bringing out numbers that we haven't seen in mid off year elections in nearly a lifetime. But they still rally their base in the same way because he's the organizing principle. I mean, I think that's got to be the calculation they're making. You're saying if he's on the ballot, though, right? No, not if he's on the ballot, just if he's in there churning stuff up. He gets out his base.
But you're saying it wasn't effective, his endorsements.
His endorsements aren't, but just the existence of him out there creating this anger towards, immigration, towards whatever it is, the aggrievement of the day. He's their aggrievement, like, dilithium crystal that's down in the engineering room, but he's just not up on the deck and isn't the first person that, like the other, people or beings meet, to use a Star Trek. But I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that what he does, and let's not forget that one of Trump's, he only has a few overriding philosophies in his life, and one of the main ones is that you always exact revenge. He is the most vengeful person I've ever come across in my life. He says it outright. There's video of him back in the 80s. Saying, of course I like to get revenge. Don't you? Revenge is everything. You've got to teach people that if you mess with me, I'm going to come back at you twice as hard. And there's nothing that Trump wants more than in the world than to get revenge against the Democrats for having stolen the election. So I think that has and I think there's a strong element of that in the Republican base, generally speaking. It's a temperamental thing. It's the way you look at the world, a Manichaean us against them kind of thing. So I think that by stoking the big lie, which is really the thing that has that 70% of the Republican Party up in arms because they believe the election was stolen, that Trump out there, flogging that over the course of the next couple of years, which of course he will be, and they're passing laws based on it. I mean, this is not just some incidental sort of messaging thing. They're actually doing things on the basis of that big lie. That is what is going to keep them churned up. Now, whether or not it works and I think mostly you're going to see this in primaries, right? I mean, Trump endorses somebody in a primary, that may not work for them. They may go in and vote for another Republican, but the idea of getting vengeance against the Democrats for having stolen the election, and we've got to take back power, and we've got to strip Biden of his ability to do anything, and blah, blah, all of that, because Biden stole the election. I think that's a big motivating force for their get out the vote. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they are, everybody now in the party, except for Liz Cheney, apparently, and two or three others, at least in the national party and across the board in the states where the Republicans have power, that they're just going along with this big lie. They're not trying to, even though Republicans in those states at the time were certifying elections were saying, no, the vote was fair, where you had the judges that had been appointed by Trump who were saying, no, there's no legal basis for your complaints, et cetera, et cetera. Despite all that now, they are now purging those people from the party. And I really think a lot of this just has to do with the opportunistic will to power on the part of the Republican Party, in which they see an opportunity to really, really degrade the democratic process to the point where they